Now, I want to be clear about this situation, and welcome to the show, by the way. This is Politics by Jake. This is the weekend show, part two, Sunday, May 3rd. And you're all welcome. And those of you who are listening on podcast, on YouTube or Rumble, welcome. Just whenever it is that you get here. And I want to talk more. I want to really kind of pick up where we left off on Saturday. This counter blockade that, of course, and this is not the blockade that Iran is doing in the Strait of Hormuz, where there are 2,000 ships that are bottled up in the strait, and they're not, very, very few of them are moving. But you have a counter blockade, which I think is an excellent idea, and I hope continues from a military strategic standpoint, because it keeps us from blowing up Karg Island. Because you have this situation, and this is why I say this, you want to preserve infrastructure. This was the problem with Venezuela. All their infrastructure is old. Venezuela is a situation where, they have oil, but their infrastructure as far as pumping and everything is old. It's debilitated. It's not necessarily the ollie income-free card as far as oil is concerned that we would like it to be. It is good to a certain extent, but there's the other shoe always drops, and the other side of the story is always told. In Karg Island, if we attack Karg Island, first of all, it's going to be bitterly defended. It'll probably be booby trapped, probably be blown up. It'll either be blown up by the Iranians, it'll be blown up by us. The Iranians will do it to deny us Karg Island, and the Americans would do it just punitively, because you have the erstwhile Pete Hegseth, who really needs to use less Brill cream on his hair. He's talks about it's the Department of Defense, but he calls it the Department of War. And he says the job of the Department of War and the war fighters, he doesn't call them soldiers. He doesn't call them the military. He calls them the war fighters. You can tell he's right off of the propagandistic Fox News. And he says it's their job to kill people and to break things. Well, that's not the purpose of war. The purpose of waging war is to cause resistance to cease. And you don't have to kill people and break things in order to do that. And this counter blockade, which it kind of reminds me of Julius Caesar, sort of in a sort of a kind of a way, because it's one-upping the Iranians, because the Iranians said, okay, we're going to block the strait. We always knew they were going to block the strait. That was always going to be their go-to strategy. But the counter blockade is kind of like Julius Caesar against Vercingetorix with the Gauls, where he created it's called a circumvallation. It's amazing engineers, the Romans. They literally created a wall around where Vercingetorix and his army was, and then they heard that there was a relief army of Gauls coming, and it was like 250,000 strong. It's just amazing. And so Caesar created another wall in order to keep the advancing army that was advancing. It was a relief army to give relief to Vercingetorix, who is the Gallic chief. Gaul is modern-day France, by the way, for those of you. Gaul, what is he talking about? Is that like something in the body, like the gallstone or something like that? No, that's not what it is. We're talking about Gaul. It's the ancient name for France. That's what Gaul is. And so this relief army was coming, and apparently it was really big. It was 250,000 strong. And so Caesar did another circumvallation around his own position so that the relief army couldn't get in, or if they did, they would have to, really, they would meet stern opposition. And in this way, I'm making a much longer story short. If you want to read the Gallic commentaries, you can find out what this happened. I had to read this stuff in school when I was in, I think it's third year Latin. You study Julius Caesar and you study the Gallic commentaries. And that's where all this stuff is, and I learned that there. And so you have this situation where he kept the relief army out with one circumvallation. And a circumvallation, once again, is you encircle your own position. And that's what he did. So he encircled Vercingetorix and his army. That was the first circumvallation. And the second circumvallation was encircling his own troops and his own position to keep the outside army that was coming in to aid Vercingetorix from getting in. Just amazing. Just the stuff that this guy did, just that the Romans did, is just unbelievable. Anyway, the counter blockade is kind of like that, because it's like, okay, you want to blockade the Strait of Hormuz. You want to blockade. You want to keep 20% of the world's oil from going out. You want to keep 15% of the world's oil, an additional 15% from going out up into the Red Sea in that area. So in other words, you're talking about potentially 35% of the total supply of the world's oil that's being blocked. And so the United States has one-upped Iran and is basically blocking all of their ports. And their ships that would go in, they can't get in. And ships that would go out to do commerce, mostly oil, they can't get out either. And so you have this situation, and they're losing about, as I said, and I talked about this on the show yesterday, about $435 million a day. That's something like $2.3 billion a week. And I've had some comments, and I always appreciate the comments from you guys. Thank you very much. It doesn't have to agree. It just as long as we're talking about the topic. Pejoratives, ad hominems against me, that's going to get blocked. That's not going to happen, because what I'm looking for is a good conversation here. I'm looking for contributions. I'm not looking for, people who say my feet's too big, if you get what I mean. So we have this situation where they're being blocked at $435 million a day. They're trying, and I think now they are trumpeting that they have had, pardon the reference to Trump, but trumpet like, a bugle, some success in collecting some of the money. Well, that's great. They're still being hurt. And their Air Force is destroyed. Their Navy is destroyed. And they are attempting to enforce the blockade with really these converted pleasure boats. Like, some of you guys who are older and you remember the old days, like Evinrude. Remember Evinrude and Johnson and Chris Kraft? They're not using military boats because they don't have them, because they've all been destroyed. Military boats like a Corvette, or that class of boat that has fixed guns to somehow intimidate this. But there's a solution to this that you can do, and it's basically what it is. It's convoys, and this is to sum up. We have a choke point problem in the Strait of Hormuz. Ships are backed up. Cargo is delayed. Oil isn't moving the way that it should, and that's not abstract. As I said, that's hundreds of millions of dollars a day, billions a week, tied up in a single bottleneck. But there's a known way, there's a tried and true, a known way to move ships through a hostile environment. We've used it before. We've used it the last time we had this problem with Iran in 1987 and 1988. And it's convoys. And here's what that means in practice. You group commercial vessels on a schedule, okay? You assign naval escort, destroyers, frigates, those kind of ships, and you move those ships as a protected unit, and they're shielding the commercial vessels. And you move those ships as a protected unit through the lane. You sweep for mines. Ukraine, amazingly, their Navy, Zelensky has offered to give the United States a couple of squads of like two or three minesweepers to do this. Britain also has minesweepers, a squadron of minesweepers in one of the Arab states. These can be used. I don't know if they're being used. If they're not, I don't know why. This would seem to be the natural play, because in this way, you control the transit window. You deter harassment, and the objective is simple. Keep that commerce moving. And in the late 80s, that approach reduced successful attacks. And it restored enough flow. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't 100%, but it restored enough flow to stabilize the route and to break resistance. And that is the purpose of war, to stop resistance or to minimize resistance or to break resistance. And it wasn't perfect, but it worked. Nobody died. Now, look at today, the opposing maritime threat. As I said, the Iranians don't have a blue water navy. It's small craft, harassment, asymmetric tactics. They're not even PT boats, I don't think. They're a handful of fast boats, and a handful of fast boats does not stop a convoy that is under a naval escort. And they get destroyed. They get diminished. Their numbers get diminished because they're going to be attacked by those corvettes and by those frigates and by those military vessels that are escorting the commercial ships. So the operational question is really very simple. Why aren't we grouping ships, assigning escorts, moving them through? Because if we did that, that would do four things right away. Number one, it would clear the backlog. Number two, it would restore, maybe not 100%, because, damage has been done. This blockade has been going on for a long time. It would begin to restore flow. It would bring the market more under control. It would reduce risk. It's five things. It would reduce risk. And in the middle of number two, I thought of another one. It would reduce risk, stabilize pricing. Well, I said that, so maybe that was what it is. Demonstrate control of the lane. Instead, we're not seeing that. What we see is delay. We're seeing negotiations. We're seeing signaling. We're seeing incremental moves. Now, there are always considerations. There's escalation risk. There's coordination with allies, which, we don't have any because, as I talked about on yesterday's show, the European leaders, the NATO leaders, the European Union leaders, they don't want to have anything to do with Trump, even though it's definitely in their interest. As I said yesterday, this war is not a war that we should have done, but it's joined now, and there is nothing to do except to see it through. And there are good reasons to see this through. But Marco Rubio, who is clearly the kakistocratic senior diplomat, such as he is, he never tried to collect the flags. He never tried to coordinate with allies, and they don't want to have anything to do with him anyway, even though they should. It's kind of interesting, but they're politicians. If their voters saw them treating with Trump, I think what they think is they'd be out of office in the next election, and the voters wouldn't forget. Because Trump's an ogre. He's a churl. He's a poltroon. He's just, as probably we'll talk about later in the show, he's not fit. So rules of engagement, those are consideration. Those are real. But none of that really changes the core fact. And that's that convoys are a viable tool to move ships now. Which brings us to the decision. When a workable option exists and it's not being used, that's not a mystery. And that's a choice. And choices at this level have consequences. Every day this continues, and we're going to talk more about this, but from another standpoint, why this isn't being done. Because is this not obvious? Is this not an obvious way to proceed, but it's not being done? And every day this continues, supply chains tighten, costs rise, leverage shifts. So here's the question. I mean, and this is a serious one. Why this approach right now? Why are we doing what we're doing, which God knows what we're doing? I mean, the Iranians really won't treat with the Americans, and I can understand their point of view, notwithstanding that they're religious fanatics and notwithstanding that they've been inciting war against the West for basically the entire existence of the Islamic Republic, which is about 48 years. I round it off, I say 50, but that's basically what it is. Death to America, death to Israel. Israel is an ally. Death to France. They used to say death to France, which is funny because Ayatollah Khomeini was in exile in France. France protected Ayatollah Khomeini. As soon as Ayatollah Khomeini got back to Iran and was the leader of the Islamic Republic, he started saying death to France. But that's the way these guys are. They're religious fanatics, and they're in control of the government. It's an Islamic Republic. It's based on Sharia law, even though they'll say, "Oh no, that's Islam. This is an Islamic Republic." It's not secular. It's based on Islam. It's based on Sharia law. And we talked about this yesterday, and except to bring it up again, briefly mention it, I won't say more. But if there are operational reasons, please say them, will you, Pete? Brill Cream Pete? If there are strategic reasons, say them. Explain them. But don't pretend the option doesn't exist, because it does. We've used it before. It was called Operation Earnest Goodwill. Look it up, 1987, 1988. In the period in United States, or world history for that matter, that was known as the Tanker Wars. We've used it. We used it then. It's tried. It's true. It's vetted. We know what it does. I mean, our generals have been using blockades ever since the Civil War. Until there's a clear explanation for not using it, this remains exactly what it is. A policy decision that has real costs and real consequences. And I think that's the opening segment. I think at this point, let's take a little break and have a commercial or two from probably Twain Consulting. And then we're going to pick up again on this and talk about why this obvious thing, which should be happening, is not being done, okay? And this is Politics by Jake. Hi, this is Jake with Twain Consulting. Let's be blunt, shall we? America is litigious. It's unstable, and it's financially weaponized. If your name is on everything you own, you're a sitting duck. At Twain Consulting, we help you vanish legally, ethically, and permanently. From land trusts to layered LLCs, we teach you how to restructure your assets so the predators can't see them and can't touch them. This isn't a loophole. It's a strategy that the wealthy have used for decades. Isn't it time you got the same protection? Call Twain Consulting at 805-380-5699 or visit us online. Protect what's yours before someone else claims it. Okay, and this is Politics by Jake, and we're back. And I said that having made these statements in the opening segment, as I have with regard to the convoy situation and the past use of the convoy situation and why we're not doing the convoy situation, because it worked in 1907 and 1988. Last I heard, we still had the ships, we still had the strategy. We have a lot of generals who were there then who know how to use that or who have studied that in military college. And there's no reason not to use it. There are going to be operational problems. You're going to run into a few mines, use the minesweepers, clear a lane. It can be done. It can happen. It's a no-brainer. You don't have to go to 4 years at West Point in order to understand this. So the question that you have to ask is, why is it not happening? Well, and I'm presaging things I'm going to talk about. Donald Trump is in this for himself. He's not a fit person. He's arguably mentally ill. And unless you say, Jake, you're getting a little excited here and you're flying off the handle a little bit. No, Jake is not. In 2016, we had such psychological luminaries as Bandy Lee and hundreds, literally, of other mental health experts who wrote an open letter saying that Trump was not fit. And he's not fit for a number of reasons. And now he is, that could be articulated. Now he's superannuated. He's almost 80 years old. He's elderly. And he has degenerative brain syndromes that are associated with age. And once again, this is frontotemporal lobe dementia, probably of the behavior variant kind, which includes various things like confabulation, which is the mixing up of one story with another that really didn't happen and creating an event that doesn't really exist, except in the mind of the person who's engaging in the confabulation, because they lose track of what's real and what's not. And, I'm not going to say this is psychosis, but the first indicator of psychosis is a break from reality, that you are no longer operating in reality. Confabulation is kind of like that. And I'm not saying that he's psychotic, but it's a break with reality. And that is one of the things that happens when you have behavior variant frontotemporal lobe dementia. The brain, these are the front right here, it shrinks in the brain pan that's supporting it. It doesn't get better. You can't take a shot. You can't take a pill. It just keeps getting worse. And it is. And he has it. It pretty much, except for the MAGA people and the Christian Zionists and the Christian evangelists who are looking at this by reading the book of Daniel and Ezekiel, I think it is, in the Old Testament of the Christian Bible, and the Jewish Bible also, and also the book of Revelation in the New Testament. That's their reporting. That's how they're looking at this. They, too, are religious fanatics. The people in Israel, many of them are religious fanatics. And so you have secular governments captured by this fanaticism or near fanaticism that is guiding these things, not out of with the desire in many cases. I think in the book of Daniel, you'll pardon me, but this is here. I know it's here. I'm not going to quote it to you because I don't know exactly where it is. But in the book of Daniel, it talks about a group of people who try to make one of the prophecies come true. And this is the kind of thing that you have here. You have these Christian Zionists trying to make it so that Jesus will come. And conducting themselves and directing world affairs to try to make this happen because they think they're doing right. They think that they're supporting Jesus. They think they're on God's side because it's going to usher in this millennium, this 1,000 years of peace, and whatever it is that they think. But I believe that's what it is. It's called the millennium, the millennial reign of Christ. He comes and he rules for 1,000 years, and everything is daisies and blue skies and singing birds and so on, and just whatever else it is. That's the kind of people that you're dealing with. This is who you're dealing with. But Donald Trump isn't like that. Donald Trump is a businessman, and this is another reason why he's not fit. He's a businessman. He's an inveterate businessman, which means that he's dyed in the wool, true blue, through and through. This leopard ain't changing its spots. And he sees in the Mideast all sorts of economic business opportunities. Now, does he see these for the United States? No. But he sees them for himself, and he sees the opportunity to grift and to con, to establish Trumpian hotels in Saudi Arabia and in Oman and the United Arab Emirates and the other Gulf states, and to make money for himself and his family. That's what he's doing there. Trump doesn't want a victory. Douglas MacArthur, I'm not going to say he was our last great general, but he was pretty good. In World War II, he made the statement, and I believe he made it in his farewell speech. I'm just kind of riffing here extemporaneously, but he did say this, and he said, in war, there is no excuse for victory. You got to have it. Nothing else will do. But since 1951, I think it was, which is when Truman basically fired MacArthur, no American general has really wanted to put themselves out in a position where they would win a war. That really hasn't happened. And you can, I'm not going to say this is the reason why, but you can trace it back to that. Because MacArthur was one of the last generals we had. Of course, Eisenhower was another. And you have, Patton, and you have Bradley, and you have Montgomery and the others who won wars. You don't have that since MacArthur. You really don't have that. And so I think that they're ceding military control of the commander-in-chief, which of course is the line of authority. The civilian at the head of the military is as the commander-in-chief. That's right. That's true. There's no argument about that. But I believe this is happening because Trump doesn't want an end to the war. I mean, he wants to negotiate. He wants business deals. That's what he wants. And that's why we're not doing the things that would win the war, because that's not what Trump wants, because he has an ulterior motive. And once again, setting aside the frontotemporal lobe behavior variant dementia that he's got, setting aside the other things that are going on with him, setting aside the upwards of 30 felony convictions, setting aside the fact that he's been adjudged in a civil case a rapist, setting aside all this. When you enter public service, you do it for the good of the country, not for your personal enrichment. And that's not what he's doing. He doesn't care about the good of the country. I was looking at some of the Epstein files the other day. Yeah, I was looking at those. And there's one of them, and I if I stopped, I could get it for you. But basically, he's in it. In this one document, he refers to the United States as this S-hole of a country. and I leave it to you to decide what S-hole means. You can probably figure it out. This isn't a guy who should be president, because this war can be won, and there are good reasons for winning it now that it's joined, but not with this guy. Not with this guy. So anyway, at this point, let's before we go on, let's take another break. And we're going to talk a little bit about the shooting incident at the White House Correspondents' Dinner, which is now a week old. But I've got an update on that, and I'll give that to you. And this is Politics by Jake. We'll be right back. Hi, this is Jake with Twain Consulting. Imagine, if you will, having the power to disappear from the prying eyes of creditors, identity thieves, nosy strangers, all while protecting what you've worked so hard to build. That's what virtual invisibility offers. It's not magic. It's smart legal and business strategy to shield your assets and privacy so you can live free, confident, and in control. Most people think that asset protection is only for the ultra-wealthy, but it's for anyone who wants peace of mind and financial security, including you. Don't wait until it's too late. Take control now. Call me at 213-465-0639 or go to facebook.com/Twain Consulting to learn how virtual invisibility can protect you and your family, because when you're invisible to risk, you're unstoppable. All right. Thank you, everybody. This is Politics by Jake, and we're back. And I told you that we were going to talk about the attempted shooting, such as it is. This is the updated information that I've got on it. The incident, the core frame on this is being challenged. The incident has been framed publicly as an attempted assassination about Trump. Here's some problems, though. The suspect never carried out the act. As far as the reporting that I've done can tell, and the sources I've got, he never fired a shot. He didn't even reach the ballroom. In fact, one of the sources I have says, and this is amazing, that he wasn't even on the same floor, that he did not get near Trump. The statement that I've got from one of the sources is that he never got within one floor of the building of Trump. So that means at best he was on the floor below where Trump was, and maybe less. And even if he had entered, he would have had to go down the escalator. He would have had to have crossed a massive ballroom, which is really big. It's basically the size of a football field. So if this is the case, who fired the shots? Well, all of the shots were fired by the Secret Service. One agent fired multiple shots. The result was actually a friendly fire agent, where one of the agents, fortunately protected by protective gear, by a Kevlar vest, was shot by another agent. He was charged with discharging a weapon, attempted assassination, but he never fired a shot. This is a core contradiction from what the administration is reporting. The authorities found a handgun. They found a long gun when they searched. They found knives. But no execution of an attack occurred. The analysis of the security perimeter, it functioned as designed. The suspect was subdued well in advance of him getting anywhere near Trump. He was tackled. Again, he never reached the target. He never fired. He himself was not shot. The intended weapon, which was buckshot, was never used. Any gunfire that happened came from agents. Friendly fire occurred. The suspect was subdued successfully, and security worked. So the characterization that you would have to say is this is not a coordinated assassination attempt. Instead, it was clearly disorganized, clearly incomplete, clearly lacking a final execution plan. The suspect had no plan whatsoever for what he was going to do for the last 5 minutes before executing the act of assassination. So, this being the case, the assassination attempt label is, as the other ones, honestly, in my opinion, are, potentially overstated or mischaracterized. Again, the suspect never fired, never reached Trump, never got close. All shots were fired by Secret Service, including friendly fire. Security worked. And yet, in spite of all this, the event was framed publicly as an assassination attempt. And we have, as we talked on yesterday's show, and I encourage you to go and listen to that, we have Carolyn Levitt, not coincidentally, coming up and saying that, oh, she's going on maternity leave, and gee, how great it's been to be here with you, and then leaving the podium, and then coming back and saying, you know, postscript. I wasn't going to say this, but I just think it's so darned important. And she's a Karen, you know, that I just had to come back. And she came and she made a statement to the assembled reporters about free speech and how important that is. But then almost with the very same breath, she made a statement, and I talk about this on Saturday's show, which is up on YouTube and Rumble. You can listen to it. It's also up on KCAA, for that matter, KCAA.com, KCARadio.com. And look for Politics by Jake, and all my shows are there, and you'll find the Saturday show where I talk about that. She said, free speech is critical, but free speech against Donald Trump is demonization and should not be allowed. Yeah, these people have never really been accused of being smart, but this is what's being said. And go ahead and check the show on Saturday for more information on that. If I have anything more on that, I'll report it to you. And having said that, we just did a little mini segment here. Let's take another break, and this is Politics by Jake, and we'll be back. Hi, this is Jake with Twain Consulting. Let's be blunt, shall we? America is litigious. It's unstable, and it's financially weaponized. If your name is on everything you own, you're a sitting duck. At Twain Consulting, we help you vanish legally, ethically, and permanently. From land trusts to layered LLCs, we teach you how to restructure your assets so the predators can't see them and can't touch them. This isn't a loophole. It's a strategy that the wealthy have used for decades. Isn't it time you got the same protection? Call Twain Consulting at 805-380-5699 or visit us online. Protect what's yours before someone else claims it. Okay, and this is Politics by Jake, and we are back. And I talk about, often at the beginning of the show, I say several things, and I actually haven't said them yet, and I often have to start out the show by talking about a segment because of the way things work as far as the algorithm picking up the show and so on and so forth. And I don't like this, but it's necessary. So it's often the second or third segment, like it is now, where I get to say, welcome to the show. All of you viewers. We have new viewers all the time, and it's great. Welcome to the fight. Welcome to 2026. And we have a midterm election. And the generic ballots in the House and in the Senate show that the Republicans, the Trumpians, the maggots are in great trouble. They are in great danger of losing the House in the 2026 midterm elections. They are in great danger of losing the Senate. And Trump and they, his cabal, his coterie, his little claque, they know very well what happens if they lose and the Democrats come into power. Trump will, and not only Trump, but Hegseth, and it's more than just this, but this will happen. And others of his cabinet will have impeachment proceedings initiated against them. It's possible that Trump may, although I don't think this will happen in 2027, be turned over to The Hague, and Pete Hegseth also, because they are both war criminals, according to the International Geneva Convention. And this may just happen. Trump knows, and his claque knows, that they have to keep power, because if they don't keep power, they're going to go to prison. And they may end their lives there. And as a consequence of that, you have to wonder what they're thinking about the election. Well, I'll tell you what I think that they're thinking. I think Trump is going to try to throw the election. And I just wanted to talk about this. I think he's going to try to do a coup. He did a coup on January 6th, 2021. There's absolutely, positively no reason to believe he won't do it again. Now, I've told you before that his first wife, Ivanka, used to say, and she is passed now, but when she was alive, she said, she was on record saying that Trump kept a book that he had that had the speeches of Adolf Hitler. He kept it on his nightstand, and he used to read them and pore over them. And, you know, Hitler came to power basically through a coup upon the government. Trump idolizes these people. He reveres these people. He adores Putin. We'll talk about Putin in a moment, because Putin is one of these who basically did a self-coup or an autogolpa. But we've got this abstract idea, and we shouldn't at all, that this kind of thing doesn't happen here. And we want to abstract ourselves away from it, and because it sounds frightening, and it is frightening. I don't want to hear it. Jake, don't talk about this. Talk about sports scores or so. Why do you have to talk about all of these things? And I just want to point out that it's very normal in a situation of attempted regime change like what we have here for a regime to take advantage of a terrorist attack, a real one, or to make one up, a fake one, and where it's not clear if that's what it is or that's what it isn't. Hitler came to power, like I say, in part because the Reichstag was set on fire. The Reichstag was the German parliament where the Weimar Republic representatives met. It was set on fire by somebody. Nobody knows to this day. Nobody knows who. It actually turns out that it doesn't matter who it was. Because, like I said, you can take advantage of a situation like that. You have Vladimir Putin, who, as I said, I think it's fair to say that this is the man on earth that Trump most adores more than anybody. He came to power in part because of self-terrorism and autogolpe. The Russian secret services actually, and Putin is old KGB. And he worked in close alignment in East Germany, when there was an East Germany, with the Stasi, which is the East German secret police. And, once KGB, always KGB. And so what happened is that the Russian secret services actually put bombs in Russian apartment buildings. Russians were killed. And this was done in order to claim that there were Chechens or Muslims who did it, and in order to justify a war. And that war then drove Putin into popularity and into his first election as president. And I mentioned those examples just to try to make this normal, kind of not in the sense that it should happen, but to make you aware that it does. It does happen. And, recently we had the election in Hungary where Viktor Orban was booted out of power. We had that. Remember that? That just happened a couple of weeks ago. But, Orban, I think it's just like 3 or 4 weeks ago now, Orban claimed that there had been a terrorist attack and that it was bad. And, it was bad Ukrainian terrorists because Orban is just a toady, for Putin. It was those bad Ukrainian terrorists. But see, it didn't work. It didn't stick. The electorate didn't care. And this is the important thing. We know from history that people try this kind of thing. And as I said, it could be real, it could be fake, or maybe you don't know whether it's real or fake, but what you do know is that this is a way that people try to consolidate power and to make elections meaningless. And once you know, and of course we talk about this on the show all the time, and once you know that, which is the reason why we talk about it, it's much less likely that it will happen, because if you know it, you can recognize it and you can say, okay, no, like the Hungarians, no, we're not going to go along with this sort of a thing. And Iran, the war with Iran, could be kept going and perpetuated because this is how Trump intends to do it. And it's pure speculation. We don't know how he's going to do it, but we know he's done it. We know he's a criminal. In fact, we know, and these are not ad hominems. These are judicial facts. He's a rapist. Yes, it was a civil case. So the wording used is that he's culpable and he's liable for sexual assault. But when the judge was questioned, the judge basically said, well, if this had been a criminal case with a jury, you would describe this as rape. So he's a rapist. We know that. He's a 34-time felon. 34 felonies. We know that he committed a coup attempt on January 6, 2021. Both a legislative attempt where he tried to co-opt the voting, and we've talked about that on the show, and also a violent attempt where the Capitol was attacked, the seat of power. What makes you think that he wouldn't do this now, the situation being the way it is? And that's why I talk about it. So welcome to the fight. Welcome to 2026. And let's keep our eyes open. And let's do everything we can to make sure that we have not only a free and fair election, but that we understand who it is that we're dealing with. We're dealing with a dangerous man who's tried to overthrow the government once. And there's even more reason now than there was in 2020 to believe that he'll do it again. And let's take another break, and this is Politics by Jake. Hi, this is Jake with Twain Consulting. Imagine, if you will, having the power to disappear from the prying eyes of creditors, identity thieves, nosy strangers, all while protecting what you've worked so hard to build. That's what virtual invisibility offers. It's not magic. It's smart legal and business strategies to shield your assets and privacy so you can live free, confident, and in control. Most people think that asset protection is only for the ultra-wealthy, but it's for anyone who wants peace of mind and financial security, including you. Don't wait until it's too late. Take control now. Call me at 213-465-0639 or go to facebook.com/Twain Consulting to learn how virtual invisibility can protect you and your family, because when you're invisible to risk, you're unstoppable. Okay, and this is Politics by Jake, and welcome back to the show. We just had one of the reporters from NBC Now, and I can't remember her name, and I hope she will forgive me, but she reported to the House, and I'm going to kind of paraphrase her remarks. She said, and I've talked about this too, I've talked about the corrupt corporate media and how they have failed and how they've been compromised. And that this has resulted, and the public media too, and that this has resulted in literally an existential threat of unprecedented proportions, and that free speech is going to be and is one of the most effective weapons against autocracy, but free speech is especially under attack by the presidential administration led by Donald Trump, a vindictive bully who didn't hesitate for a second to target the media and call them enemies of the people. Just like Carolyn Leavitt, his press secretary. Demonization, simply because he doesn't like their reporting. And to add insult to injury, the broader corporate environment has rapidly begun to evolve into one where media executives are acutely sensitive, so acutely sensitive to tone and content in the wake of Trump's return to power that the message was painfully clear. You either bend the knee or you face regulatory consequences. And the networks, as I said, they've capitulated. They've failed. Corporate leadership, always timid, always fearful, operating under that constant drumbeat of regulatory pressure as they were, has become incredibly risk-averse in ways that are invisible to the public. Of course, I'm talking to you about it, but these are felt immediately by the journalists. The things that myself and my colleagues are talking about on digital alternative media, which I hate to put it this way, but let's just say we're picking up the slack from the corrupt controlled corporate media and the corrupt controlled public media. You couldn't say these things on a legacy media platform, a corporate media platform, the kinds of things I'm saying now. Like that Trump's executive orders are really pursuing the ethnic cleansing of this country while prioritizing a white Christian nationalist agenda, that a convicted felon whose name appears more than 38,000 times and counting in the Epstein files is unfit unfit physically and mentally for the Oval Office. These truthful things must be said loudly and without apology, but the voices that are willing to do so in the legacy media are being increasingly cowed into silence as corporate executives grow more and more fearful of the Trump administration's wrath. And with that, we bring to a close this weekend shows. We'll see you next week. Have a good one. And we'll meet back here next Saturday. And this is Politics by Jake.